So I've been using this term fascism. It's not always a popular term. There's a lot of debate about what terminology is best to describe what Trump is up to and what different far-right anti-democracy groups are up to and what they're doing. But this is part of my intellectual framework. I've found this helpful, and I do think it's applicable to what we're dealing with right now. So we have three basic meanings of the word fascism. So there are three ways I think this word can be used. So fascism is not just a word for things we don't like. It's not just a word for someone being mean or strict or authoritarian. It is a more specific ideology. So I don't think, for example, that if someone wants to ban certain kinds of speech, like say that certain forms of hate speech are illegal, or that if somebody says you have to wear a mask in the mall, or you have to get a COVID injection to go to high school, I don't think that's fascism. That's not what I'm worried about. But I do think there are three legitimate uses of the term. Number one, so there's the question of what makes a country fascist. And the two prime examples that we often hear people talk about are Nazi Germany under Hitler and Mussolini's Italy in World War II. But those are not exclusive. And you might think about Franco's Spain. You might think about more recent examples, Brazil's Bolsonaro, Hungary's Orban. There's been a resurgence of fascist and fascist-adjacent movements in the world today. And we also want to recognize that even though the word fascism comes about in the context of World War II and in the context of Mussolini originally using that term, so we associate it with Nazis and Nazi Germany and World War II, the roots of fascism are deeper and longer. And so when we look at the history of white supremacy in America, it's certainly legitimate to see as proto-fascist or leading to fascism or fascist before the name, things like the KKK, right? So when we're looking at the history of white supremacist mobilization in the United States, that is also a fascist history. Now, the question of what makes a country fascist is kind of a fraught political science debate, and people get into these stages. They're like, how many people in power have to be doing this? How demobilized do the courts have to be? How much are the police and the military controlling everything? And that's kind of not my lane. I feel like it has to become something I'm figuring out because of the moment we're in. But I'm not sort of deep into the weeds of like, are we all the way there yet or not? We can talk about that. But that is one legitimate use of the term. Another use of the term is number two, which has been more of my research focus over the past 8 to 9 years, which is individuals, groups, and movements, organizations that are ideologically fascist in their beliefs. So they consciously embrace the ideology that we're going to talk about here. So the neo-Nazi groups, white supremacist groups, various kinds of fascist movements. We might include here, we would include here definitely certain Christian nationalist groups, and we can talk about Christian nationalism, what that means, and so forth. And then thirdly, I think there's a legitimate use of the word fascism to refer to actions that facilitate this kind of worldview. So several years ago, there was an incident on the border where there were Border Patrol agents on horses, whipping Haitian immigrants on the border. So when you look at an image like that, you've got hierarchy, you've got racism, you've got an image out of slavery, you've got race, you've got border enforcement, right? There's so much going on there that I don't care if the Border Patrol agents are sitting around reading Hitler at night or whether they're sharing swastika memes online. I'm still going to call it fascism, right? Or I'm going to call it fascistic behavior. So that's also a legitimate use of the term, and we can think about that. So I take a social movement approach to thinking about fascism and how to fight fascism. And what that means is I see fascism as a social movement, And I believe it needs to be countered with alternative social movements. So this is in contrast, for example, to a perspective that would say, for example, fascism is just a problem of a certain political party, and then if we elect other people and get that party out of power, the problem goes away. I don't think that. I also don't think that fascism is a crime problem or a mental illness. So there are people that see fascism as something that we're going to have social workers intervene in the schools and counsel the kids, and we're going to have early intervention, we're going to prevent things with algorithms on the internet, we're going to arrest the people that are in these criminal underground neo-Nazi biker gangs, etc. And there's a whole industry tied to state power at the national and international level around doing that. So there are whole agencies, there are whole buckets of funding around sort of social work prevention of fascism and sort of crime prevention. The reason why that's not fundamentally enough, although there are times when you have to call the police because someone's going to do a mass shooting, the reason why that's not sufficient is that fascism is a social movement seeking power, and it's always already connected to sources of power. So you can't count on the power structure to defeat a system or a movement that's intertwined with it. There are fascists in police departments. There are fascists in the Department of Justice. Clearly the person who runs the Department of Homeland Security Twitter feed is a Nazi. Kash Patel, the current head of the FBI, has gone on loads of Nazi podcasts. But even in a liberal democratic administration, there's this intertwinement with power. So countering these movements requires social movements in response. Fascism relies on systemic and internalized white supremacy. And there are other oppressions we could add here around homophobia and transphobia, nativism, anti-immigrant sentiment, misogyny, hatred of women, sexism, ableism. Down the line, basically with any form of prejudice, including some things that we may not think of as related to identity, like hatred of homeless people. So there's a kind of, there's a question we have to ask ourselves, which is, how is this possible in our society as a live political option? There's a famous philosopher, American philosopher named William James, who used this term live option. There are some things in our lives that seem like live options, and there are some that just don't. So, you know, I come from a multi-faith background. I've got a Catholic and a Jewish parent. I could see like both of those as live options growing up. I just never considered Hinduism, right? And it's not to say that like it would be impossible for me to become Hindu. There's nothing like negative or bad about Hinduism for me, but it's just never been like on the table as something I've like actively considered. So when we think, and you know, I think about my students, like for many of my students, not going to college was not even a live option. Like they're like, we go to college. Some of my students, going to college was not a live option for their parents, and it only became a live option in their generation. So what are the live options available to us? If one of the live options people can pick is fascism, that says something about us as a society. It says something about what attitudes are normalized, both structurally and in our own internal ideas that we have to work through. Fascism is a modern social movement. It emerges under capitalism. It has support from powerful politicians, think tanks, and funders, and it's enabled by various fascist adjacent far-right movements. So core beliefs of this movement: number one, a belief that people are naturally unequal. Hierarchy is seen as good, that some people should have more power than others because they are more worthy of power, and that this should be enforced according to race, gender, ability, and so on. There's a belief that violence is good in itself. Many social movements see violence as necessary under particular social conditions. That's not the case for fascism. It sees violence itself as sort of connected to human nature, sort of ennobling, sacred, bringing out the best qualities in those destined to rule. It's a highly militaristic, highly violent worldview. There's a lot of use of scapegoating and conspiracy theories. So scapegoating, we're talking about identifying some minority group in society and saying the reason why you've got problems in your life is these people, whether it's the Jews, the Muslims, the black people, the transgender people, whatever the thing is, right? So these people, the immigrants, whatever it is, they are causing all your problems. So we're going to go after them to deal with your problems. And conspiracy theories are often tied in with that. So the belief that these people that are the problem are secretly controlling society in some way. It seems like things are working this way when you watch the mainstream media, but actually secretly behind the scenes there's somebody else controlling it. Those people are the problem. There's a contempt for democracy and for reason. So there's a belief that democracy is bad. What you should have is a rule by the best people. And we don't come to the truth on this view in the way that most people think we come to the truth. So most people think, if I want to know what's true, I can go find out, and it might turn out that my assumptions were wrong. Like, I think that's what most people think. Whatever they're researching, they're like, I'm gonna go find out about this thing, I'm gonna find out, and it might be that I'm wrong. Fascism, on the other hand, sees truth as something created by violence, by the best quote-unquote people, right? So they're these superior people that have a superior access to truth, who should be in power, and in some way they're kind of above reason, above truth, and above law. So they get to decide what the law is, above the courts, above all of that, right? They get to decide the law, decide the truth, decide power. There's also belief that history moves in cycles, so part of the role of violence is to sort of cleanse and reset the world back to the hierarchy they desire. These are two tweets from over the early Trump 2.0 administration. This is Donald Trump quoting Napoleon. "He who saves his country does not violate any law." And this is an image of Trump tweeted by the White House account, sort of like a Newsweek magazine cover. He's got a crown on and it says, "Long live the king." In power, fascist movements seek to consolidate executive power. Okay. So some of you may have heard of Project 2025. It was like a script for what the Trump administration was planning to do. It was this document written by the Heritage Foundation, a number of other think tanks. And in the lead up to the Trump administration's current iteration, there was an attempt to lay out a plan for consolidating executive power. So the idea is anything in the executive, whether it's agencies dealing with labor, roads, airplanes, food protection, medicine, whatever the thing is, there should be no impediments to just immediate enforcement. The courts need to get out of the way. Police need to just immediately implement the will of the ruler. The military needs to immediately implement the will of the ruler, as he recently called them in and told them, right? And anybody that's not a hardcore loyalist is getting fired. Right? So anybody in any agency, whether it's the Department of Peace, Department of Alcohol, Tobacco, and Firearms, Department of whatever agency there might be, if you are not a hardcore supporter of the leader, you're out, right? So that was the early Trump administration's game plan, and they did it. They just swept in and they just fired loads and loads and loads of people. Fascist movements also seek to scapegoat, dehumanize, and target the outsiders, leading to disappearances, expulsion, and genocide. So we need to realize we are not just dealing with arrests of immigrants, we are dealing with disappearances. So if someone is gone and you can't track them for 72 hours, and you're getting the runaround, like you're like, where's my aunt? And you call this office and this office and this office, and they say, oh, you know, she's in a facility in Tacoma. Oh, we might be sending her to El Salvador. Oh, we might be putting her in Alligator Alcatraz. Never mind, she's downstairs at the police station right now. If someone gives you the runaround for days and you can't figure out where your family members are, that's a disappearance, like under international law conceptions of disappearances. So we are facing that already. We're facing people, thousands of people we can't locate, who went into the facility possibly in Alligator Alcatraz in Florida, and we don't know who they are. There are people in El Salvador imprisoned by the US. We don't know where they are, who they are, right? So there's disappearances happening. One of the things fascist movements do when they get executive power, presidential power, is they make a division between us and them. They tell you who your friends and enemies are. And the influential figure here is the Nazi legal theorist, the philosopher Carl Schmitt, from the era of World War II, or lead up to World War II. Schmitt believed that the leader should be above the law, not subject to it, and that the leader's role is to tell you who your enemies are. That's really fundamentally the leader's role. It's just about that. Like, these are the people we're going against. This is us, this is them. The leader draws that line for you and then says, because we're in such a crisis of conflict, we have to suspend the regular rules. We have to suspend the Constitution. We have to suspend checks and balances, maybe suspend elections, so that we can deal with this crisis. Whatever crisis it is, they can take advantage of, whether that's a hurricane or a made-up crisis, like an immigration crisis, whatever kind of crisis they can identify or make up or declare. This allows what's called the state of exception. So according to Schmitt, once this is established, the leader can say, we have a situation where we have to take an exception to the law. And we have to allow the police, the military, or maybe paramilitary groups, like not official but working with the administration kind of groups, like the Proud Boys or something, to just go and do what they have to do, right? I don't know if anybody follows the Twitter account of the Department of Labor. I don't know why you would. I don't know why anyone would. But this is what the Department of Labor's tweets look like now. So on the left here, we've got a white dude in front of an oil rig, and it says Americans first. And over here, we've got a very idyllic white family in church with a flag, a dream worth fighting for. Here are some more of them. They have been tweeting basically a white dude a week, and they all look the same. So they're all blonde, they're all standing in front of oil rigs, they're all muscular, and they are all concerned about the homeland. This guy in the middle, I think he's getting ready to punch someone. So this is, if you've seen like propaganda out of Hitler's Germany, this is very resonant for me. And there's a term that we might...
Recording in progress.
Oops, sorry. I think I hit something there. There's a term that we might want to think about here called producerism. So the idea of producerism is that some people in society are producers, and other people are takers. They're like makers and takers. They're people that make money and they're people that take money. Productive people and parasites. Now, a traditional like progressive or socialist view is different. It says there are workers and there are capitalists. So you're a worker if you are paid a wage for the time that you sell to your boss. So you go to work, you give a certain amount of time, and you get a paycheck. If you are the person distributing those paychecks and reaping the economic benefits of owning the company, then you're a capitalist, in rough terms, right? That's a sort of socialist view that there's a conflict between workers and capitalists. That's a left-wing view that is a long-term view. Fascism, on the other hand, is producerist. So instead of seeing workers versus bosses, workers versus capitalists, it sees society as including people that are productive and people that are parasites. And the people that are productive include both certain capitalists, the ones that they see as on their side, creative, innovative, conquering, and then also the kinds of workers that they see as the future of the nation, right? Dudes like this. So conservative, ideological, fascist, tough workers, primarily white, right? And then on the other side, you've got the parasites, the people who are taking advantage of the system, the people who need welfare benefits or unemployment, the people that are homeless, the people that are immigrants, the people that have disabilities and need disability support, people that are retired and need Social Security benefits. And also, it classifies some of the people with more economic advantage as also parasitic. So it will classify people according to anti-Semitic conspiracy theories, for example, like let's say people like George Soros, or these people over here, these liberal elites in DC and New York with their liberal newspapers and so on. They're also parasites. They're not really producing for society. So it's like, on the one hand, like Elon Musk and Peter Thiel versus like George Soros, and then it's also like a split between different kinds of people who are all producing and working in various ways, but some of them may be deemed not worthy of assistance that they need to survive. So this is another term that we want to think about a little bit. So this has become a more prominent category lately, especially since the January 6th coup attempt at the US Capitol. So we're hearing more and more use of the term Christian nationalism. Now this is tricky because most people that we identify as Christian nationalists have not historically called themselves that. There are people that will tell you they're fascists. That's their ideology. They're consciously fascist organizations. Christian nationalism is a little bit different until recently. So when the crowd stormed the Capitol building to try to keep Trump in power the first time, a lot of them were waving Christian flags and saying Christian prayers. There were pastors there. There were particular churches that mobilized to get people to that event. Many of the people that were very active in mobilizing for that event were part of a neo-charismatic movement called the New Apostolic Reformation, but it's not exclusively that. There was a Catholic priest there. There were all kinds of things. So there were a lot of Christian symbolism and Christian vibe at this coup attempt in 2021. Because of that, there was a whole attempt to understand what was happening on the part of academics, journalists, researchers, and this term Christian nationalism became much more prominent. And as there were people, including people in churches, so you met multiple pastors have been working on this, like my friend Drew Straight, who's at a Mennonite seminary in Indiana, Amanda Tyler from the Baptist Committee on Religious Freedom. There's a lot of cool people doing this work of distinguishing between Christianity and white Christian nationalism, trying to hold a line between the two, right? And as all of that emerged, there was a backlash from right-wing activists who then, to kind of thumb their noses at the critics, said, yeah, that's what we are, we're Christian nationalists, Christian nationalism. And so they adopted that language more in response to the activists and the critics. As a result, defining this is somewhat difficult. So some academics that talk about Christian nationalism just talk about sort of any blending of Christianity and the state. So they'll say things like, praying at a flagpole, or having an American flag in church, or singing the America the Beautiful in church, or starting a city council meeting with a prayer. And they'll classify all of that as Christian nationalism. It is, in a certain sense, I'm not a fan of any of that stuff. Like, I am for separation of church and state for the sake of both. But that doesn't mean that the people who are singing America the Beautiful at church or whatever, like, want to storm the Capitol building or want to impose Christian power on society. And it's this second thing that I'm really worried about, right? I'm worried about the increase in movements of people who want to see Christianity as something we're going to enforce with power and violence. There's increasing language around requiring political leaders to be Christian, banning non-Christians from voting, expelling non-Christians from the country. And of course, even what gets defined as a Christian down the line is going to be complicated, right? So I think some of the people that are enthusiastic about this now are going to find out pretty fast that maybe they don't belong to the category or the type of Christian that's going to get those benefits if this movement gains power or increased power. So there's overlap with white nationalism, with people who want the country to be all white. Not all Christian nationalists talk that way. Some do, some don't. There is racism baked into it, but not all of them are about expelling non-white people from the country. And there's also a spectrum of religious sincerity among these movements. So I think it's important to realize, so a couple of things have happened. So remember in 2017, there was a rally in Charlottesville, Virginia, of neo-Nazis, who Donald Trump declared afterwards to be very fine people, right? If you remember that. And they had torches, right? They were marching at night. It was a violent rally. Heather Heyer, a young woman, was killed. People of color were beaten up in the streets. It was a whole like riot, essentially, a white racist riot called Unite the Right in 2017. After that rally, which had brought together various fascist and white supremacist and white nationalist groups, there was a split among these racist political movements. Some of them were embarrassed by how Charlottesville looked to the public. So they took a different approach, and they said, we need to stop looking this way. Let's cover up our tattoos. Let's be a little more clean cut. Let's just look like the boy or girl next door. Let's just tell people, like, I'm just conservative. I'm just traditional. I'm just like you. I'm normal. The country's what's changed on me, right? And to enter into mainstream institutions, like lower level political positions, taking over Republican Party chapters, Republican Party campus clubs, and any different space that they could find to infiltrate. So churches, charities, farmers markets, video game subcultures, right? To find every social space they could find and to show up and recruit in slow, subtle ways. Not by waving swastika flags or doing Nazi salutes or showing up in Confederate flag gear, but slow normalization of their views. Saying the things they want to say until they seem normal in that space. And then the other branch of that movement was like, no, that's too slow for us, let's go plan mass shootings, right? So that group still exists, but to be honest, it's the first group that worries me more. So we have a movement that has entered mainstream politics in this country, that has entered the Trump administration and the Republican Party highly successfully, that has largely taken it over. So this does not mean that your random Republican aunt is a Nazi. It does mean that the Republican Party content she reads online is written by young Nazis in many cases. If you look at the tweets, if you look at the messaging of all the major government agencies right now, those young social media people that are in charge of promoting the government line across all these different agencies, they are tweeting out the same stuff that Nazi kids were tweeting out in 2016, right? So the messaging, the symbolism, it's all there. So coming back to Christian nationalism, it's important to realize there's a spectrum of sincerity among Christian nationalists. Some of them are what we call LARPers. So LARPing stands for live action role playing. And the main image I associate with this is Renaissance fairs. And I have never been to a Renaissance fair. I don't really have anything against it. I think the idea is people dress up in like medieval outfits and they ride horses and they fight with fake swords. It kind of sounds fun, but it's an image for like sort of playing dress up, right? Like, I'm gonna just pretend I live in the Middle Ages. And what's happening is some of the Nazis are like just pretending they live in the Middle Ages. So they've entered mainstream institutions by taking on the trappings of Catholicism in some cases, Eastern Orthodoxy, sort of traditionalist Calvinism, traditionalist Lutheranism, like trying to just show up as normal/traditional, because they believe something in the modern world has gone astray, that we've lost something. So they're taking on the clothing, the costume of something from the past. So going to Latin Mass with Catholics, for example, you'll see people who I am fairly certain have never actually been in a church, holding up rosaries or pictures of Mary at rallies. Now, that is not to say some of these people are not religious fanatics. That's there too, right? So there are people who their interpretation of their faith is they need to go out there and fight to force everyone to follow their faith. But the reason why it's important to understand that not everyone is doing that is it's going to shape our strategy. Because some of these people are not sincere and they could care less about your theology. So just to kind of be aware of that spectrum. So according to Matthew Taylor, who's one of the main guys researching this, and several other people, if you're looking at sort of where the buckets of Christian nationalism are, they're very different. They're not all necessarily doing the same thing, but they fall within three main categories. And this is not me saying that all non-denominational charismatic evangelicals or all traditionalist Catholics or whatever are Christian nationalists. But what kind of theology buckets do they fall in? Apparently, if we're looking at this, we see kind of three main ones. So particularly at the US Capitol, we saw a lot of non-denominational charismatic evangelicals. Among young far-right, alt-right fascists, we're seeing a lot of Catholics, including some that belong to schismatic Catholic movements that don't recognize the Pope. And the most important person I see within influencing the far-right Catholic, let me put it differently. The most important person I see within fascist movements in the United States who identifies as Catholic would be Nick Fuentes. So Fuentes is one of those people that I would see as a LARPer mostly, like I don't think he goes to church. But Nick Fuentes is a very young guy, and he got his start. He's about 27 now, but when he got his start, he had a little podcast with a guy who's from this area named James Alsop. Does anyone remember James Alsop? So he's gone kind of out of the picture. I hope that's because he's rethinking his life choices. Maybe he's just building a bomb in the woods. I don't know. But we haven't seen him in a while, so that's probably good. We drove him out of the county Republicans of Spokane back in 2018 when he tried to take over. So he retreated and went on some podcasts for a while and spewed a bunch of racial slurs and hasn't been seen a lot since then. But at the time, he was one of the most important white nationalist leaders in the country. And he was active in this town and surrounding area. And he got his start with Nick Fuentes. So the two of them had a podcast together, and their podcast was about entryism and normalization, about how to make fascism look normal, right? How to show up and take positions in the Republican Party, how to gain power by looking normal. And he's been so successful at that this past week he was interviewed by Tucker Carlson. And there has been a variety of responses to the fact that a virulently racist Holocaust denier who says women should be raped and so forth has been promoted by major leaders in the Republican Party. Fuentes also went to Mar-a-Lago a few years ago with Kanye West, and had dinner with Trump. But the past week has been interesting after the Tucker Carlson interview, because some Republicans said, well, that seems like a bridge too far. But a lot of people didn't. J.D. Vance said, I'm not going to go after that. I have no problem with that, right? So from the executive on down, we have a normalization of fascism. There's also Calvinist nationalist far-right movements. The most prominent one is Christchurch, based in Moscow, Idaho, near here. And Christchurch has a lot of money and a lot of influence, a lot of power. One of the people in the Trump administration right now, Pete Hegseth, who heads up Department of Defense, Secretary of War now, because we had to make it sound more warlike, belongs to this denomination. Very, very hardcore. They'll say things, they've defended slavery. They've talked about campaigning for women to not have the vote, this kind of thing. Okay, I'm gonna probably stop in just a moment because I want to take questions. So, Christian nationalist movements have varying ideologies. We talked about that. It's more than just being Christian and conservative or Christian and patriotic. It's primarily about the imposition of Christian power. Strict gender norms is a big theme. Strict enforcement of a gender binary. Authoritarianism in families, schools, and society. And I think one of the things, too, to be watching with all of these movements is how do they recruit youth? From homeschool curriculums all the way up through online recruitment. So we can talk about that more. But outright fascist movements have a role in the Trump administration. Subtly fascist Christian nationalist movements have a role in the Trump administration. And Silicon Valley culty tech world ideologies that overlap with both have a significant role in the Trump administration. So what I want to do is I'm going to pause here. We're going to take some questions, and then after we've had a little bit of interaction here, I want to keep that energy so that we can think about something productive to do, so we don't go home and cry into our pillows and just mope and let the fascists win. So please, I hope people will participate in the next stage after this. So I'm going to take some questions first. We've got PD on a mic who can help you with the microphone so people can all hear you. And then we will, after some questions, take a break and regroup. Go ahead.
What in God's name is a good source of news? As the garbage that we see, it completely makes me puke. Is there any decent that we can find something that's halfway appropriate or truthful?
Yeah, I read a lot of left media. Other people might suggest things. Democracy Now! Is a good source. They have a nice daily announcement series. In terms of specific stuff about the far right, if you want to do a deeper dive and read some articles, looking at Political Research Associates online, they do a lot of explanation of particular groups and organizations. We can talk about all of that more, I think. Let's get some more people, and I'll maybe have some more things for you if we want to talk or if we come back to that. I can hear you for what it's worth, but if it gets louder, that'd be better.
Hello?
Yes, definitely.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, so I was wondering about how Christian nationalist movements are dealing with splits around their relationship to Christian Zionism, and whether this rise with Fuentes, particularly recently, has caused any schisms on that at all, because I haven't personally seen it in the monitoring I have done, but I'm wondering what you're seeing in terms of how they're negotiating that.
Yeah, so I know how much you know about this, so my answer is probably not going to be helpful to you, but it might be helpful to other people. So one of the big dividing lines within the far right is Zionism and also whether people are willing to be openly anti-Semitic. So I think, for example, if you look at Charlie Kirk, who was shot a month ago, and the response to that has been terrifying, by the way. Somewhat by design on the parts of some of the people that you might not think are doing that by design, just people online like, well, clearly we need to put the Democrats in camps now, right? Some of that is people who are waiting for a moment to say that. So it's a very scary moment, and I know people on campuses who've been threatened and attacked and so on because of just saying stuff online about Charlie Kirk. Charlie Kirk is as far right as you can go without jumping the line into neo-Nazi alt-right territory. So he towed that line very, very carefully. And the way he did it was he always fell back on support for Israel. So he was like, well, I can't be anti-Semitic because I'm pro-Israel. A lot of the things he said were anti-Semitic, but in more vague, couched ways than somebody like Nick Fuentes. Charlie Kirk's organization, Turning Point USA, which has both a faith component, Turning Point Faith, and a campus outreach component, was targeted as a strategy by Nick Fuentes' followers, who are called the Groypers. And Fuentes' group would go to Charlie Kirk's events with questions planned, designed to sort of implant anti-Semitic conspiracy theories about Jews running the world, demand that Charlie Kirk denounce Israel, but in very anti-Semitic terms, not like, obviously these people don't care about the human rights of Palestinians, right? That's not what this is about for them. They're about promoting hate, right? So they came with these questions. They would organize counter events, like our event's just a little more radical, a little more, we go a little further than Charlie Kirk. Meet us across the street afterwards, that kind of thing. And they successfully infiltrated Turning Point USA quite a bit. So there were multiple people who got into positions of leadership of different chapters, different campus groups of Turning Point USA, who did share Fuentes' overtly anti-Semitic genocidal ideology. So this is continuing, I think, to be a question of whether there will be any line possible. And unfortunately, neither side of that line is particularly helpful to anyone, right? I come from a Jewish background on my mother's side. I'm proud of that. I've educated communities around anti-Semitism. And I don't think solidarity with Palestinians or Palestine liberation activism is inherently anti-Semitic. I've been involved in Palestine solidarity work throughout my life as well. A lot of my experiences of Judaism have been with Jewish folks doing peace work. So that sort of hardcore Zionist silencing of campus activism, demanding lists of people for the Trump administration, all of that is hurting activists, is hurting left-wing Jews, it's hurting all kinds of people. But it will be interesting to see if that line holds at all, and I think we're going to find out over the next month or two. Further questions? Sorry, that was kind of long, but I kind of wanted to say that.
So going back to when you began, you used a phrase proto-fascism and then said it was even pre-KKK. And so I went backwards to colonization.
Yes.
And the papal bull that said any Christian monarch, any lands were to be kept for that Christian monarch, but any lands or peoples occupying those lands were for the taking as long as it was a flag planted for a Christian monarch.
Yes.
And so the way I have been coming to view this is all of this goes back to that thinking and theology and declaration of colonization. Mm-hmm. And until we as a nation have like a truth and reconciliation and come to terms with that and all the implications of the othering, no matter who the subgroup is or what the distinctions are made, we're gonna rotate through this as we have for 450 years.
Yeah, I think you're right. And this comes back to this question of like, how is this emerging as a live option? Because we are seeing this more overt, more in-your-face bigotry and more aggressive, less masked movements. But these are really deeply rooted things in our society, and they definitely go back to those original sins of America of genocide and slavery. And I don't think there's any way to get out of both the role of colonization and the role of slavery in this history.
I actually just want to add more to that, which is that, the settlers back in the day came from a European system that had its roots for thousands of years. So it's more than just what we did. And I'm not minimizing what happened here. It was absolute genocide. But this is what primarily white men have been doing for way more than 400 years. So
Yeah.
what that does for me, though, is really make me feel completely hopeless, because somehow we were able to contain and make it not okay. And Trump and throughout the world, it's okay now. He's given it credence. The powers that be on, oh my God, right? These are all people who've now given it legitimacy. And it's like it's out of the bag or whatever. I would love to hear specifically, how do we get rid of that? I don't know, but that's what scares the shit out of me.
Yes. A couple things that I can say in response to that. So one, you're pointing to the length of time, but also the range of space. And it is important to realize, because we get very hyper-focused on the US in America. We don't even sometimes realize what other countries are out there. And these are international movements. So when we look at when we look at fascist movements, where they're getting their funding, who they're connected to, there is international reach. The long history is there. I don't think it means we have to be defeatist. It means, I think, we have to fight on two levels. So we do have to address systems, structures, and internalized bias that exist within us and within mainstream society. And we can't just table that to fight these most hardcore far-right groups. Both of these things have to be happening. I think sometimes there's a tendency when when everything is on fire to just deal with the most extreme horrible things and not to continue fighting for the causes that are important to us. So we have to keep working for everything, for all the forms of emancipation, not just like keeping the Nazis out. And that's deep work in all kinds of ways. It's internal work, it's structural work, it's societal work. And I think it's important to stem the tide of this, because we are in a really urgent moment. Tarso Ramos from Political Research Associates did a fantastic interview with a podcast called The Fascism Barometer. That might be another thing to add to our list of sources. Check out Ajaris Dixon's work on the Fascism Barometer. Tarso Ramos a couple months ago said we are in a 12 to 18 month window. In this 12 to 18 month window, approximately-ish, we are going to see increasing authoritarianism, so troops going into cities, people getting arrested for their politics, disappearances. This is going to escalate unless we can stop it. And after that 12 to 18 month window is passed, if we have not used our collective power effectively, if we have not built an effective movement against fascism, we might not be able to in the normal public rallying kind of way. We might be driven more underground. We might deal with levels of censorship and control that we're not accustomed to. So, and we're going to see potentially increasing authoritarianism, increasing control over that time. So we are in a very, very urgent moment. I still think we can win. I still think we can beat it. Erica Chenoweth, who's a scholar of nonviolent movements, says that if we can get 3.5% of a country involved in a nonviolent movement against an authoritarian regime, you can win. And we probably close to reach that with no kings. But that doesn't just mean 3 to 5% of people show up for one rally once. That means 3.5% of people are doing something on a regular basis. Out there mobilizing for change, and we can do that. Okay, so I'm going to give us a little 5-minute break. So if you want to, maybe a 10-minute break. Why don't we take a 10-minute break to chat? At 4:10, we're going to come back here, and I'm going to walk you through an exercise where we can actually design and choose something that we're going to do. And I'm going to show you how my strategy works for thinking through how to push back against fascism in the spaces that you're in. So please come back, don't be shy, it'll be great. Thank you so far, it's excellent, good questions. So what I'd like to do now, I got a couple questions during the break from people chatting with me about the emotional toll of the moment, right? So people talking about fear and how fear can shut us down, and people talking about their sense of overwhelm. I think, so for me, my sense of hope, and there was a question on the Zoom as well, like how do I keep going? My sense of hope comes from action. And that's not completely satisfying, I realize that. Like you have to take breaks, you have to look after your own emotional health. You have to have friends and outlets, aside from this kind of bleak news. But for me, I think when you're in relationship to the thing that you are working towards, when you're in a relationship with your goal, with your endpoint, it changes your outlook. So you are then taking steps towards the thing you are working towards, rather than sort of from an outside perspective wondering if it's possible to get there, right? So what I'd like us to do, I'm going to walk us through an exercise, a group exercise, to think about how we can take action. And I'm hoping that everyone will leave with some vague idea of a thing, at least, that they will try to do next. Some of you are already very engaged, so don't take this as shaming, like you're not doing anything, do more. But I think this is a useful exercise for thinking about how we can do something. So one of the things I was talking about a moment ago was entry into mainstream spaces, or normalization of fascism. So fascists taking over more space. That means that all of us, to some degree, are in spaces that are contested, where fascists are trying to gain power. It is not bad that you are in that space. It's bad that it's happening. It's good that you are in that space because you can do something. So sometimes people think, oh, don't worry, all of my spaces are morally pure. I only go to activist groups that share my beliefs and cool coffee shops that are fair trade, and I only go to a church where everyone's concerned about what I'm concerned about already. That's actually not the goal, right? So if you need to be in those spaces for your safety because you're undocumented, that's one thing, right? If you cannot be in certain spaces safely, that's a reality for a lot of people for different reasons. But if we are trying to find only morally pure spaces to be in, you're going to miss opportunities to push back in contested space. So I have a belief that everyone belongs to at least 5 different subcultures. And even people who are retired who don't get out much, even people who are antisocial, even people whose best friend is a cat, I believe all people belong to at least 5 subcultures. So I will tell you what I mean by that in a moment. So we are in a creeping state of exception. So the state of emergency, there's not going to be some one moment necessarily. Like at the beginning of the Trump administration, I was kind of waiting for it. Some of the researchers that follow this stuff were like, when is he going to announce that all the opponents are just going to be rounded up and put in camps, or the elections are canceled? That might happen. But we also need to be prepared for the fact that there have always been places where legal protection and human rights have been suspended throughout American history. There have always been spaces and communities that have not had that protection. And what we're seeing is an expansion of that lack of protection, a creeping gradual expansion into troops going into new cities, court decisions being ignored, different groups of people being targeted. So we can't be like waiting for the one moment. We're not prepping for the one moment. We are trying to regain space. At least this is my perspective. So making fascism unacceptable in more spaces. And we're not doing that by becoming friends with fascists. There are people you can move. So what I think about sometimes the spectrum of allies is a term from George Lakey. There are people who are totally on the same page as you. Cool, support each other, go do cool stuff. There are people who agree with you and they're passive. They're not doing anything. So you want to bring them in. Those are your passive allies. You want to give them a way to contribute. Then you've got people that are neutral. They're checked out. They don't know what's going on, or they're torn between different perspectives. They're getting news and opinions from different people. They're not committed to a side. Those are people you can reach with information, and you can move some of them, right? And then there are people who are opposed to you, either passively or actively. People who are actively opposed to you, who are actively out there organizing for fascism, are not safe people to engage with. And I know, and I've seen so many attempts that have endangered communities. So I come at this not from a sense of like those people are irredeemable or something, like sometimes people leave these movements, they hit rock bottom, they rethink their worldviews, but beating your head up against the wall of those people who cannot be moved and cannot listen, even if they're in your own family, you've got to protect yourself and protect your people a little bit from that. But there are people, and we can sometimes move those people towards passivity in their views or towards rethinking their views by making it hard for them to organize, making their life a little more challenging, right? So when they come to present hate and violence and defend their ideology, when they're met with opposition, critique, anger, when people say, well, we're going to try to get you fired or we're trying to kick you off social media, that actually does play a role in some people either withdrawing from activism or even rethinking because they realize, wow, my life is going nowhere, right? But right now they're being rewarded with more power. Okay, so I think there are two things to do. There's sort of building spaces, subcultures, institutions, finding spaces, subcultures, institutions where we can do this work, finding people there doing the work, pressuring leaders who are passive to take action. And then that's not all we need to do. There's more things to do. And I think part of this is so thinking about how we're going to support people and support each other as things maybe escalate. All right, if I could have your attention again for a moment. So I'm going to walk you through a three-part exercise here. I know not all of you have the flyer. There are way more of you than we thought there'd be, which is a good problem to have, but we will make sure every group has some flyer you can look at. What we're going to do is we're going to take 10 minutes or ish. Maybe I'll stop you if we're running a little slow, but I think it's about 10 minutes. And what I want you to do is think about what kind of subcultures, communities, institutions, organizations you might belong to. That's step one. So the list I have here on the flyer is workplaces, professional networks, like maybe if you're a social worker, a teacher, engineer, you may have an organization of people that you work with at the national or local level. Your field of study or your major if you're a student, or student organizations or clubs if you're maybe in high school or college. Hobbies you have, whatever hobbies you have, and a hobby, when I ask my students what their hobbies are when they introduce themselves, they get this blank look like they have no hobbies. But it's just what you do with your free time, right? Fandoms, so if there's a sports team you follow and a music artist, a show, faith communities, labor unions. Some people are in labor unions and they don't even know. Like they're paying dues to a union for a workplace they're at, but they may have never met anyone from the union. They may have never gone to a meeting. They may not be aware that their labor union may have made statements addressing immigration rights, things like that. Fraternities, lodges, elks, anything like that. The place you hang out. So like maybe you have a coffee shop you go to every morning or every week, or a bar you go to every week, something like that. Your neighborhood or your apartment building, who's around you, physically where you live. Family reunions, dangerous territory, but that may be a space where you can do something. Social media, parenting groups, anything you do with other parents or with youth. Online gaming, it's a big space that's being infiltrated. Volunteer groups, mental health and addiction recovery groups, veterans groups. So I'm just asking you to think about where do you come into contact with spaces that are politically blended? That's really all I'm asking, right? So if you've got a sheet of paper or if you've got my handout, the first step here is we're going to take about 5-10 minutes in our groups, and I want every person to list something if you can. If we had a lot of time, I would have every single one of you list your at least five subcultures, but maybe as a group get 5 at least out of the group, like organizations, places you're coming into contact with other people. So that's step 1. If your group All right. Is it
I'm
working?
not sure if this is a subculture group.
Okay, guys, we got an example over here.
Service Committee, AFSC.
American Friends Service Committee. All right, good. Less chatter, please, for a moment, unless you're very quietly picking the person who's going to talk. I'm sorry, I did put you on the spot like a teacher. Yes, anybody in that group got something that's a subculture you're in? 1 or 2 subcultures.
1 or 2. Okay, well, a few of us in this group, we go to gyms, exercise facilities.
Ooh, that's a good one.
Yeah, and I didn't mention it to the group, but
So if you are in, gyms, if you are in the exercise community, that is definitely a heavily infiltrated space. So that is a place where fascists recruit, organize, work out. That's a good one. Petra, maybe back here, over here, a couple more. If a group is brave, you could raise your hand to list your 1 or 2 subculture examples. Sure. Excellent.
I'm with the League of Women Voters, as are several others of us here, but that is a group that has a single vision, which doesn't mean we're partisan, because we're not, but generally, the things that we work for are more liberal, so that's who we mostly are, and I just don't see infiltration there.
Yeah, it's quite possible. And so the goal here is not to list the spaces you're in that are not being infiltrated. It's not a condemnation on you to be in contested space. You should be in contested space. If you walk out the door in the morning, you're in contested space. So what are the places where we can come into contact, not to convert people that are violent fascists, but to move people or to move the norms that are acceptable in that space? Yes, this group, good.
Okay, I've got one, or a couple actually, a group called Let's Talk, which is a men's group.
Interesting,
Oh,
yeah.
That's a general, okay, sorry, yeah. I don't know what I'm talking about. Yeah. Oh, okay, so it's a discussion group. Also got a dinner group of people that have different views, right? Yeah, okay.
I got one over here, but while I'm walking, I like to talk about things in the grocery checkout line. I'll say the bananas have diversity, and I like to have inclusion with my groceries, and
Yes, good.
kind of triggers people, but it's fun.
One of the ones that I'm in that has been very contested is
Quiet, please, so we can, just everyone be quiet except for the speaker, please. Thank you.
one of the spaces I'm in that is very contested is fan fiction.
Yep. Fan fiction, yep.
Very good. Anyone else over here?
Online and gaming communities, like just online in general, depending on Facebook,
Yes.
TikTok, anywhere else, they all create their own sort of
So,
you can come into contact.
given that we don't have a lot of young people here, it might be, I don't know if I should say it that way, apologies. But I wonder how many of you have encountered, and we can do this survey and then we can pretend what would happen if we did it with high school students. How many of you have been playing an online game and somebody started saying racial slurs or homophobic slurs, or they started propagandizing you? Yeah, see the hands? This is a very, very common phenomenon. And it's not accidental. It's not like just people like to play video games and when they get mad about things, they like to say racial slurs. This is people who hang out in that space deliberately to change the social norms and to recruit people into fascist movements. So we're seeing that across internet spaces, we're seeing that in faith communities, we're seeing that in all kinds of organizations, charities. So one of the things that fascist groups historically like to do is rebrand as helping the community, right? And in some communities, if you're in a rural community and you are suffering in poverty, there are places in this country where one of the few sources of aid you can find would be either an intensely Christian nationalist church or a far-right armed militia. So if we're abandoning that space, that's another space that we're ceding to fascists, right? So we also need to think about like where is aid being provided and making sure that that's also available through non-fascist, anti-fascist spaces. Okay, it seems like you all did a good job with that. So I'm going to talk you through kind of what you can do with this information. So there are a number of different ways that fascist infiltration or targeting might be showing up in these contested spaces. You might, for example, encounter people, like in the case of the video gaming world, who show up to spew hatred. And sometimes this may appear, it may be presented as sort of unintentional, subtle, or just asking questions. So we need to be watchful for uses of humor to promote bigotry, memes, and people will say, oh, it's just a meme. It's not just a meme. Things that are stated often in very sneaky ways. Now, this does not mean that everyone who says something that's problematic is part of a fascist movement. But it does mean there's a strategy of fascist movements to occupy more space and to normalize their views. And they do it often through humor. They do it through saying, oh, I'm just asking questions, or oh, I'm just traditional, or that's just what people like me have always thought. If that is tolerated in that space, it gives them the ability to grow. And they're often there's a kind of teaching model, there's a kind of pedagogy of fascism that works like this. They will get people to say something that seems generally not problematic in a neutral way. For example, one of the slogans that's been captured by the Groypers, Nick Fuentes' group, is Christ is King. Now, lots of Christians, probably most Christians, believe in some sense that Christ is a king. It doesn't mean a king of America or something. It means like a different kind of king, right? A king not of this world. But then you'll see people using that slogan in anti-Semitic contexts. Another thing that used to happen was the slogan, it was a whole heyday of this slogan around 2018, it's okay to be white. Now, okay, like obviously being a white person is like not a thing that you can help, right? It's not, like you didn't do something problematic by being born, but what were they counting on? They were counting on young people that they were targeting with this recruitment, putting up posters saying it's okay to be white, people looking at those posters and thinking, sounds kind of like this is a white supremacist ploy, it gives me a bad vibe, right? And then people saying, you can't do that, we're suspending you, this is not acceptable. And they have been pre-told by these recruiters, by fascist recruiters, you know what's going to happen if you just say it's okay to be white? Or you just say Christ is king? Oh, people are going to persecute you. They're going to come after you because they persecute Christians or because they persecute white people, right? And so we've got to get ahead of that. And we've got to be counter-recruiting, right? Because there's a whole pedagogy in place. But some of those slogans, you still have to say no. You still have to say, no, you're not just asking questions. We know what you're doing. This is a fascist meme. You can't do this here, right? So setting those kinds of boundaries, setting the boundaries of acceptable behavior, setting the boundaries of what kind of people are allowed to recruit and organize in a space. So if you go back to like the 80s when neo-Nazis were less prominent in government and more prominent punching people in the streets in the US, although it's always been porous between the two categories. There was a lot of taking over of music festivals and taking over of the punk scene and taking over of bars. And what happens is somebody says, oh, I'm just for, the bartender might think, I think those guys are gross, but I'm for free speech, whatever. But if you ignore it, they come back with 3 friends, and they come back with 5 friends, and they come back with 10 friends. And before you know it, you've got a Nazi bar or you've got a Nazi concert, right? So drawing those kinds of boundaries, very important. Thinking about who's being targeted, impacted, threatened in the spaces you're in, how can you support each other? And then how can you do some education and prevention around the spread of fascism? Can you talk to people about what's happening in the country? Can you set some boundaries with ICE? Like if you're in a space where, it might be good to set up a sign at a business or an organization and say, this is a private space. You need a warrant if you're going to come in here, or if you're an ICE enforcer, something like that, immigration enforcement. There are lots of different things you can do. So there are 2 steps to this next question. I'm going to give you 7-ish minutes to ask each other if you've already seen signs of fascism or fascists present in any of those subcultures, or if you're not sure or haven't seen any in any of your subcultures, because I guarantee they're there in some form, how could you find out where they are and what they're doing? So who do you know that could help you figure that out? So take 7-ish minutes with sort of where are they in your subcultures, and then after that I will talk about sort of what we can do. If anybody feels that they have an example that might help people understand a little bit more what I'm talking about, that came up in your group, if there's something in your group that came up where you feel like, oh yeah, we agree, that's definitely fascist doing something in a subculture, maybe raise your hand, and if you can kind of call over Petra, we'll just get a couple examples of this.
Okay, can you hear me? Yeah. What I've seen the most in our subculture.
If everyone could be quiet, please.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Our subculture, which is focused on exercise spaces and gyms, is the demonization of poor people. The idea that they're takers. I shared an example where I was shocked at the amount of money I was going to be charged for Medicare. And I was talking about that, and what I heard was that there were people who were taking, that I was supporting all these people that hadn't paid enough into the system, who weren't as worthy as I was. Mm-hmm. And I was shocked. I was absolutely shocked, but I did openly state my disagreement with that concept.
Yep, excellent. This is that producerism that we're talking about, and it shows up as prejudice against poor people, it shows up against people with disabilities. A whole other area we should be thinking about right now is dehumanization of the homeless as an aspect of fascism. We've got concentration camps being built to house homeless people, like Utah has already passed a whole thing to force homeless people into camps. They're looking for who we're willing to dehumanize. If they can get their foot in the door, if they can find the group of people that we're willing to throw under the bus, whether it's undocumented immigrants, homeless people, trans people, people with mental illness, people with addiction, any kind of group that we're willing to dehumanize and compromise with them on, that's where they're gonna go to build their movement. Another example over here, good.
So this is about challenging somebody's beliefs. This was in a small church group setting, and one of the people made the comment that he works for a cable company, and he went to this house, and there was this man, his house was dirty, and he obviously was very poor, and how could he have a big television like that? Just how dare he have a television like that? And I said to him, well, what do you know about him? Do you know anything about his medical background? Do you know he has a disability? Do you know he maybe has mental health challenges? What do you know about him, and why are you labeling him like that? You know, where's that coming from in your belief system? He was so embarrassed that I challenged him to think a different way about a person that he knows nothing about.
Wow, you got to him a little. Yeah, it's good. You got through a little there. Good. One more, if we could. Anybody? Is there one more that wants to go? Okay, good. And then I'll show you one more thing on this before we go to take off. Good.
I go to school in a very Mormon area, and I've seen lots of posters around the school for a few different clubs, like the Christian Athletes Association, the Holy Club that reads Bible together at lunch, the Jesus and Donuts Club that meets in the morning. Just all of these groups that are, there's a seminary class. Yes, it's a public school. There's a seminary class that is technically not on school property, but it's basically on school property. Just all of these things that I don't really engage with, but I can see so well around the school that lots of people are apparently engaging with them.
Yeah, and so Christian student clubs run the gamut. So you've got things that are very much contested spaces, and then you've got things that are more Christian nationalist, and then you've got things that are more sort of inclusive, democratic values. The LDS church in general is split. It's quite interesting because you've got some Latter-day Saints folks that are pushing back on fascism and nationalism, and then you've also got what's called Deseret nationalism, a kind of alt-right wing of the LDS church. So it's complicated, and I would recommend that one of the things you could do in that environment, I don't know who knows who and who chats with who, but you could map that a little bit. It might be fun to have some friends for coffee, if you have some friends you trust that know about these clubs, and kind of try to figure out where they are on the spectrum. There might be some that are reachable, and there might be some that you need to sort of view as needing to protest them, right? So there's there might be a gamut there that would be interesting. Okay, excellent. So last step that I want to run with you here, I would like people to feel, again, empowered to do a thing. So I want you to strategize a little bit with your group on these last two questions for the last 5 minutes or so. How can you connect with other people who are already doing the work against fascism in that space so you can work together? This is very important. So you don't want to just be the person that, like, on your own discovered that there are fascists in gyms or whatever, and you go out and organize against the fascist gym culture and ignore the people that have been doing that for the last decade, right? So, and you're also not alone, right? And there's safety and solidarity. So you want to first start out by trying to figure out, how can I find people that are already doing this work? And they are there. So depending on how niche the subculture is or how particular the organization is, you might not find specific people that are doing anti-fascist organizing explicitly, but you will find people who want to make the space more inclusive, or who are concerned about the future of democracy and inclusion, who want to bring forward better values in the space. So thinking about who in that space you could work with that's already doing some of that kind of work, and then what further actions could you take together to make that space less welcoming of fascism as an ideology, to make fascism less normal in that space. So take a few minutes with that, and then we will review and wrap up. All right, I'm going to pause you for a moment, but those of you that do, have more time, you could maybe stay a little longer in your groups, but I want to just kind of close us out here, because we did just kind of give ourselves a 2-hour limit here. It looks like there's been some very productive conversation today. If I have made you feel more aware of how urgent things are, I hope you take that with you as motivation, not as despair. In my experience, just doing a thing, and I'm a person that gets very paralyzed when I have a lot of things to do. I've had people tell me that it's probably something diagnosable. I don't know, maybe. But the more deadlines I have, the less I do sometimes. I get like, oh my God. But if we can do a thing, right? If you could think about one thing you could do, one person you could talk to that you haven't spoken to yet, not outreach to fascists, but somebody in one of these spaces that you think would be someone you could work with productively on something like this. One thing you could look up, one thing you could do, taking some of those next steps. And you're going to hit some dead ends. If you try the subculture approach, it's not the only thing you can do. There's lots of activism. There's going to demonstrations. There's setting up chairs. There's making phone calls. There's always work to be done. And people are needed in all areas of this work. But if you want to try this particular aspect of activism, I would not give up. You might hit a dead end. In the first subculture you try, you might be like, wow, I can't figure out why I picked this. I can't find anyone. That's okay. Move down the list. But I think if you try this, and maybe you could report back to some of us at some point on your findings, I think you're going to find that we can take back the space and we can take back the narrative a little bit in some of these spaces where we're encountering contested space. If you want to stay in touch with me, I have an email list where I spam people mostly with talks I'm about to give. I honestly think everyone meeting somebody here and staying in touch with a new friend would be a more productive use of your time than emailing me, but that's not to say don't. My emails are here. My last name, Braun, braune.joan@gmail.com. I'm on Blue Sky, the Twitter alternative at Joan Braun. And I started a new Proton mail because at my last presentation, a guy was like, I want to email you, but I boycott Gmail. So I'm also at Joan Braun at Proton, PROTON.me. So feel free to stay in touch with me. Please make a friend. Petra, is there cookies? Are there cookies? It's been a long day. There are cookies. So say hi to someone, make a friend. Thank you so much. Keep doing what you're doing. Great work.